Welcome to our panel. I'm Saasha, co-founder of OLIO. OLIO's been around for about 9 years now, and we've helped ensure that about 150 million meals over the last 9 million years that would have gone to waste have gone to feed the local community instead. That's food that's donated by individuals from their home kitchen, but also we partner with most of the nation's food retailers and contract caterers to rescue their unsold and unserved food and make sure that it feeds bellies, not bins. I'm delighted today to be joined by, not in the same order, obviously, by Will Nicholson from WRAP, and next Martina Dell from the Sustainable Restaurant Association, Ben Thomas from the John Lewis Partnership, and finally Lily DeGama from the WWF. I'm sure you all know the drill. Please make sure to ask us lots of interesting questions. Keep us on our toes. But before we get going, I just want to remind everyone about the scale and really shocking statistics about food waste. So more than a third of the world's food that's produced is never eaten, which is incredibly bad for the environment, given how much the food supply chain is responsible for global carbon emissions, 25 to 30%. So that when a third of that goes to waste, that actually accounts for nearly 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions directly related to food waste. It takes a landmass larger than China and Malaysia together to grow food that's never even eaten, and 25% of the world's fresh water supply also goes to grow food that's never eaten. Meanwhile, we have nearly 1 billion people going hungry, and that's not just a problem in the third world. Here in the UK, we have 13.7 million people who go to bed or don't have enough food to feed themselves and their families, and 4 million of them are children. So it's bad for the environment, and it's also very immoral. So what can we do about it? I'd love if each of the panelists in turn could introduce themselves a bit more fully, but briefly, and also tell the audience, please, what does a sustainable food future look like in your definition?
Am I starting?
Yes, please. Go ahead.
Go first. Thanks, Saasha. Nice to be here, everyone. So I run the Global Food Waste Programme at WRAP. And so we've got food waste programmes in the UK, but also in South Africa, in Australia, a new one coming up in Brazil, and Indonesia and Mexico. Food waste is a global problem, obviously, so let's look at it from a global perspective for now. Food waste occurs across the value chain, so a sustainable future for me is that we tackle food waste at farming, manufacturing, hospitality and food service, retail, and importantly in the household. And the first step is food waste prevention. And then when you've got some food surplus, how do you get it to the people who need it? So that's the umbrella vision really for how we might get to halving food waste by 2030. Within the UK context, 60% of the food waste actually occurs in houses. And actually that costs the average household of 4 people £1,000 a year. So to the point about cost of living crisis and food poverty, household food waste is a really big problem and we need to tackle it. So the vision really for us at WRAP is a system change across the food system. So food waste is being prevented at every step, but not forgetting household.
Amazing. Martina?
Hi guys, I'm Martina Dell from the Sustainable Restaurant Association, and for those of you who aren't familiar with what we do, we basically run an accreditation program for food service businesses, as well as do projects on the side of that. Our accreditation is based on a 10-point framework, really holistic view on sustainability, and each one of those framework areas is actually equally weighted in the scoring of the assessment. Food waste makes up one of those key areas, so kind of in the same context as paying fair trade and living wage to your staff, we look at things like more plants, better meat. But actually, again, food waste is one core pillar of that because we do really feel like it's that big an opportunity for businesses. I think food service, which is obviously who I'm sort of representing today on the panel, has a huge opportunity to sort of influence the conversation around food waste because they have a bit more of a captive audience and they are kind of the people that we look to sort of influence what we choose to buy and how we cook. So when you have, really cool influencer chefs putting things online about how they're using surplus food at home or in their restaurant kitchens, I think it gives a really big sort of opportunity. From a future food perspective, I think going back to that point about a holistic framework, it's an element of the issue, and it's one we definitely need to look at. But I think we're really almost needing to go right back to the beginning, where you already said kind of starting with elimination. But I think even calling it food waste, we've already failed. We've already lost a huge opportunity to really think about the circular regenerative view of our food system that we need to be thinking about. So yeah, I think we'll probably dig into that more a bit later.
Great. Thanks. And Ben?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ben Thomas. I'm a Senior Environment Manager for John Lewis Partnership with my Waitrose hat on today. My remit is pretty broad at best. I look after everything from nature, water, biodiversity, chemicals and food waste. It's a real big priority for Waitrose as a business. I'm responsible for setting strategy but also implementing that strategy throughout our supply chain, so from customers' homes in our own operation and down into a supply chain. So extremely broad but important area for us. We've been doing a lot of work over the years with RAP and other organisations to understand our part and what we can do to drive change in our supply chain. We're making progress, but there's an awful lot more to do, which we'll definitely touch on later on today. A sustainable food system is one where food poverty is a thing of the past, in very crude terms, and if we can avoid food waste completely, then absolutely that should be the end goal. Also, from a very personal perspective, a sustainable food system is one where food is designed and grown with allowing nature to thrive. Really important that we don't ever forget the premise behind the food system and the importance of nature in that system.
Thanks, Ben. Lily?
Thanks, Saasha. Great to be here. My name is Lily Dagama. I am from WWF UK. So the question we get quite frequently is why are WWF working on food and not just pandas? The simple answer is our food system impacts everything in nature. We know that we have a finite area of land with which to produce food, fuel, homing, on which we live our entire lives. And as long as we are wasting 33 to 40% of food, we are potentially expanding into areas of nature even further to produce extra food to feed people when we could be using that which is wasted. What does a sustainable food future look like? To me and at WWF, we view it as when we can produce enough of the right food for people and for planetary health in a resilient and sustainable manner. And I think that's just a really Cliff Notes version of it.
Well, I think we all want that on a T-shirt. So the question really is, what can we do about it from farm to fork? What are the innovations or practices or solutions that you guys see that you really wish could be widely adopted? And what do we need to do to really accelerate that adoption? And Lily, I'm going to go back to you, actually, starting with farm, and then we'll move along the value chain.
Great, okay. So, farm stage food loss. I think one of the things that we should start with is the SDG, which sets a goal of reducing food waste by 50% and reducing food loss by blank. We don't have a target there, and the reason that we don't have a target is because it is a very, very difficult area to measure. It's a very difficult area to get data on, but what we do know is that an extraordinary amount of food is lost at farm stage. So something to bear in mind is that where food waste manifests is not necessarily where it is caused. Sorry, my mic cut in and out for a second there. We see a lot of food loss occurring on farms as a result of either later stage supply chain activities, so things like contracts being cancelled. We all know about specifications being set incredibly high. But also because of factors beyond control in terms of weather impacts, the weather can drive gluts. It can also, we're at risk in the UK of food shortages and price hikes as a result of the flooding that's been going on recently. So it's a very, very difficult area for us to impact. But what we also know is that we can not impact this area without a huge amount of information. And luckily for us, we live in the era of information and technology. We're just not collecting that data. We're not sharing it in a way that actually means we can drive impact. So one of the key issues for me when it comes to food loss and food waste, in fact, in the supply chain, is the linear and siloed way that we treat the food system. which makes it very, very difficult to intervene to make a circular food system, which reducing food waste is reliant on. We see just-in-time models and contracts which only allow food to move one way, which drive overproduction in order to meet the quantities required. When we can start using the information available to move away from that, I think we can start seeing a lot more progress in local food systems, in farmer data sharing, so that they can learn from each other, they can share. So one of the examples I really like is there are protein standards for wheat, which mean that for it to be sold into a bread supply, it needs to have, I think it's 13% protein. So if a farmer has a crop which is 11% protein, it's more than likely going to be sold into animal feed as a result, directing it away from human nutrition and instead into the animal feed system. Whereas if we can redirect that data, that could be blended with another farm, which has maybe 15% protein, and bring it out at what's needed for it to stay in the human food supply chain.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, conveniently, we are lined up from farm to fork with regard to potential areas of expertise. So, Ben, what about in retail and also in manufacturing, to the extent that you...
Yeah, it's a really interesting area. So I think it's fair to say that retailers have kind of grasped the importance of food waste over the last sort of decade or so. And obviously there's a huge amount more to do, but we're desperately going in the right direction with the help of RAP and others. So that would be aligning to Lily's referring to SDG 12.3, so that's a 50% reduction by 2030. But essentially, what we're doing in our own operations is extensive, using the likes of OLIO, FairShare and other redistribution partners to ensure that we do something really positive with the surplus when it does occur, and make sure we keep it essentially out of the bin, whether that going to humans. The reality is that we are only a small cog in the bigger system. So as I alluded to earlier on, we're a really important player looking upstream and downstream into our supply chain. Waitrose, as a food retailer, we made it mandatory for all of our UK supply base to start reporting their food waste and loss a couple of years ago. It sounds like quite an obvious and straightforward thing to do, but it's anything but. It's challenging and difficult to get that data and ensure that we then do something with it. But we can only manage what we measure, right? So it's been a really important step forward for us to actually say, okay, where are the hotspots? Okay, we've identified them, what can we do to ensure that we minimise food waste, and when a surplus does occur, we ensure we get it back into the human food chain, either that redistribution via charity or back into as a biochemical feedstock back into product. So a huge amount still to play. Now the elephant in the room, and Will and I talked about this a little bit earlier on, I'm sure we'll touch on it, is customer food waste and our role as a retailer in influencing customers to start, I guess, valuing food slightly more than they have done historically, particularly in the UK, which I think we're particularly bad at. But I think 60-70% of food waste happens at home. As a retailer, we've got really, I think, as a food retailer, Waitrose, we're kind of trusted by our customers. So hopefully we can try and nudge and point as obviously as we can towards actions and interventions that need to play. But we're sort of walking quite a tight thin line, I should say, around this area, because it's really, really important. We don't want to be becoming too patronising, because we have to look at ourselves sometimes and say, actually, we're not doing an amazing job, but there is also a job for us as a retailer to say, actually, customers, you need to come on this journey with us for these reasons, and we can help you by doing X, Y, and Z. But we're really in the foothills, and there needs to be an acceleration in that space.
It is very challenging. I think I saw a survey not too long ago. Something like 82% of customers think that the retailer from which they purchase their food plays a primary role and has a responsibility to help them make, I guess, better food choices and waste less food. But no one really likes to be told to shop less, eat differently, and also you've got responsibility to your shareholders and your colleagues to maximize revenues and profits. So it is a very delicate balance.
It really is, and you're competing messaging from an E&S function, but across the business, whether that be financial, commercial, imperative. So there's a really interesting stat that someone told me that every customer that comes to the shop only takes away 7 words in that whole customer journey, from the moment they come into our car park to the point in which they leave. So there's 7 words you've got to land that they will take away and consume. Now, when you're competing for price, promotion, all those other factors, and food waste is one of those factors, you've got to make sure you land that message and land it well. So we're up against it, essentially.
Yeah. Awesome. I'd love to discuss that with you more after. All right, Martina, in food service.
So I think I would almost start by saying not all food waste is equal. So I think we already heard a little bit about it on farm level and thinking about human food supply chain versus animal supply chain. So I think when you think about a restaurant context and an operation, there are many parts within that kind of operation where food waste can happen. But I think even starting from the beginning point of thinking about what you're buying and what you're wasting will make a big difference into, I suppose if you think about scope 3 or the actual impact of that waste will be different based on what the food type is. And so I know there's loads of different definitions out there, whether it's edible or inedible, and RAP have done some fantastic work, Guardians of Grub, around kind of target, measure, act, and really trying to help the sector understand how to identify and then reduce. But it all really comes down to where the impact is really dependent on the type of food that's being wasted and where in the chain it's being wasted. So I think some of the issues around it and kind of the reporting legislation that's coming down and where it's really tricky is I think we're often looking at food waste reporting as once it's already been in the bin, and people kind of measuring food waste at that stage as that's our number, that's what we need to reduce. So many challenges with that in a restaurant operation. The amount of turnover in restaurants and the amount of time that it takes to train staff properly on a busy shift to ensure that they're not contaminating waste that the business is then fined for, except there's really, really difficult operational challenges around that. So I think there's really a massive opportunity and need and focus to kind of talk about the waste much earlier on in the chain before it's getting to that. And you started to touch on it a little bit, Ben, as well, around the kind of where's the customer's role in this. Again, another challenge for food service, but also an opportunity. People turning up at their favorite high street chain and expecting that every bit of the menu is on offer at 9:30 at night is a real challenge. And not only that, they want it ready within the kind of 12 to 17 minutes that they're used to waiting for it. So it means that it kind of needs to be pre-cooked and ready to go. And I think that's one major issue. The other is the kind of value for money perspective and how much food a customer really wants to see on their plate for the amount of money that they've paid. And again, coming up against competition, etc., you kind of really are dancing a fine line between people feeling ripped off despite not being able to eat everything, but leaving just enough that it's not worth taking it home, or they're heading to the cinema, etc. So I think there's really an opportunity. I think based on the latest RAP figures that I've seen, the food service is responsible for about 12% of food waste in the UK. So certainly an opportunity. I think it's probably a lot less than households because it's business operations. People are much more attuned to where their losses are happening. But it's a really, really busy environment, and I think the sector really just does need support. So I think really kind of useful to have organizations like RAP really leaning into that space. But it's about, I guess as small operators sometimes really finding the time to dedicate to that, or actually understanding the opportunity and the value. And it is often kind of looked at from a financial opportunity perspective, but we're actually starting to see more and more that this is coming up on the radar for businesses as a scope 3 emissions conversation, probably because they make their margins, especially from a plate waste perspective. That food's been sold. So despite them kind of reporting it in their bin, they've made their money on it. They've covered their labor. So it's tricky to try and influence changing that plate waste when there's no real financial incentive, or it feels smaller to the business. Tricky space, but certainly loads of opportunity.
And definitely last but not least, given that so much good food that is edible that does go to waste takes place in our homes, and I believe that's because if you ask the average person if they're an above average driver, almost everyone will say yes. And if you ask the average person if they waste any food, almost everyone will say no. And there's just this real disconnect in terms of people having an honest assessment or understanding of their food waste footprint. So what do we need to do to overcome this and make real changes in terms of how much food waste is occurring in the home?
Yeah, thanks, Saasha. Yeah, that does make me the fork, doesn't it, in the box. Hello to all the spoons and knives out there. So just to sort of dial back a little bit, and the approach we take in RAP is we work really hard with the industry, the food and drinks industry, but we also work with policymakers and, for example, local authorities, because the list of stakeholders that need to be involved to really tackle food waste is goes way beyond the food industry, and really applaud all the work that's been happening further upstream than where I'm about to talk about. But it is actually all interconnected as well. So just to give a quick example of that, when we work with the food industry, we work with them on an approach that we call target, measure, act. So set a target, measure it and report it, preferably report to RAP, and then act. Now, there's 3 parts to act. One is sort out your own operational waste. The other is look upstream and work with your suppliers. So the things that Ben was talking about, connecting up with the work that Lily's doing, is a really important part of this. And the other side of ACT is look downstream and what can you do as a business to help reduce household food waste. Just to bring some of that to life a little bit, and a shout out to the work Waitrose have been doing with RAP. We have a project at the moment where we're trying to help people to buy the amount they need in the supermarket, and focusing on fruit and veg to start with. Fruit and veg is one of the biggest categories that gets wasted at home. And we're working with the retailers to remove the packaging off fruit and veg so that they can sell more loose. So there's actually quite a lot of advantage to this. One is obviously it reduces single-use plastics, which I think everyone's nodding, so I don't think I need to sell that idea to anyone. Secondly, it allows people to buy the amount they want, so you can help people to reduce food waste at home. So buy what you'll need. You leave the supermarket with the right amount in your shopping basket. And then there's actually quite a lot of sort of add-on benefits there, that if we want people to eat more fruit and veg and a wider diversity of fruit and veg, it's a lot easier to do that if you can go and buy what you need. So you can actually go home with a wide range of fruit and veg in your basket, rather than going there and thinking, I want 1 red pepper. I don't want to buy 3, so I'll buy none. So actually, if you get it right, then you can really make a difference. And I'm not going to sort of steal all of Waitrose's thunder if Ben wants to add to this, but the pilot that Waitrose have been doing has been working out what's the messaging that you need to help people to actually choose loose. So using some really clever technology like eye tracking technology and things that I just will never be able to understand. We don't know what the results are yet, I don't think, but it's going to be really interesting to see how do we actually help people to make those choices. The other side of it, obviously, is when you get home, making sure that you've eaten what you bought. So there's a whole host of stakeholders involved there. For example, the rollout of household food waste caddies from 2026 represents an opportunity to help people to actually get their heads around really how much you're wasting. If your food waste is going in your normal waste bin, you've really got no way of gauging whether you've got a food waste problem or not. It's impossible to do. People have got busy lives, etc., etc. So with the rollout of household food waste bins, are there other things you can do there to help people to understand how much money they could be saving? So there's a lot of stuff going on there. It doesn't happen in isolation of everything else. So if you want to sell more loose fruit and veg, the supply chain's got to be geared up to do that, so you don't end up pushing a food waste problem elsewhere. So one of RAP's superpowers, I guess, is we can convene people. So as part of the work we're doing with Waitrose, we're also convening the supply chain about how do we make that bit work in the supply chain, and then convening all of the retailers and the supply chain in terms of what might the policy option be to level that playing field and actually make it work for people, so it stacks up from a business perspective as well as a food waste perspective.
Thank you. And we don't have any questions that have come through. It'll be very embarrassing in about 6 minutes if we don't have any, so please do use the QR code to submit question. One of the things that has been mentioned is the need for more sort of circular food systems, and that requires partnerships, networks, collaboration at different stages. How do we create more of those networks and partnerships, and what can you envision us seeing in the future as we collectively work to solve this very, very complicated problem? Does anyone want to go first?
Um,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to jump in and say you sign up to RAP's Quartile 2030.
Yes,
I
that's
actually was
true.
going to big
But then
up.
Shameless
now
plug,
I've got
Will.
that bit in, I'll hand over to Martina.
I was going to say actually, it is kind of industry collaboration networks like the one that RAP's doing some fantastic work on around Target Measure Act, and I think just having that really simple kind of call to action, but people from across the entire food system in one room trying to do the same thing and understanding how one person's, waste is another person's treasure. It's kind of really basic but quite true. And actually we've done when I was at Nando's before I joined the Sustainable Restaurant Association, there was a piece of work that we did that actually just started with a really basic Target Measure Act kind of on-site pilot where we asked staff in the restaurants to just measure in clear containers and kind of take pictures throughout the day and let us know what's in those bins so that we can understand what the big issues are. And we targeted a lot of that, but when I go back to the point of not all waste is equal, there's a load of chicken bones and corn cobs that will always be a huge weight of food waste for Nando's, but is sort of considered that inedible bit. So we did a little kind of try to understand, is there anybody who wants these bones, even though they've already been used, eaten from, so there's something there around food safety legislation and stuff as well, but we'll say that. But one of the things that we kind of did after that was, okay, we've looked into the bins, but we also started to try to use data around, we called it variance, but basically saying we're buying, this based on our forecast, this is what we think the sales will be, this is what the sales were, but there's food gone missing. And we don't know how much of it is actually in the bin or where it's gone to, but one of those things was actually halloumi sticks. And so we started to dig in and ask staff, kind of really engaging the staff and involving them in understanding why that was happening. And they started taking pictures of the ones that they were basically not using or ditching or saving for their staff meals. But we were, buying in bricks already chopped into sticks, and the ones that were coming at the corner pieces, because of the way that halloumi's kind of naturally stacked and stored and transported, they were just getting a bit squished and not really good enough to sit on a nice plate where you're only getting 6 sticks. You want them to look fresh, right? So we went back to the supplier and said, we're producing a whole load of waste around this. What can we do together? And kind of actually worked out from a cost benefit analysis that it actually made sense for them to slightly kind of recalibrate their machinery to cut slightly different product spec sticks. But also they added an entire extra person onto that product line to kind of remove the ones that weren't meeting the quality spec and use them in another kind of product where it would be a kind of breaded halloumi stick or something like that. So I think when we talk about circular, it's there's certainly this kind of whole everything we're trying to see as solutions for the entire food system are about going back to nature and looking at a natural ecological system. It's made up of a load of individual stakeholders, call them beings, whatever. I think we need people to talk to each other to try and look up. Certainly data and technology will help, but there's just a lot of actual conversation that needs to happen between people to understand what they're seeing, why it's happening, and try and work out those solutions together.
Great.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump
Go ahead.
in.
Yeah.
Oh.
Go on.
Lily, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Martina, wild to me that people are wasting halloumi of all things.
I mean, I'm sure the staff were eating it, but it wasn't going through the till.
So to Martina's point, I think data is such a huge thing. It just gives us so much information about what we can be doing differently. I think one of the hard things in any sustainability initiative is flying blind and just hoping it makes an impact. So the Target Measure Act approach is such an important one. WWF has been working with RAP and CGF and WRI and other global food system actors to create the Global Farm Loss Tool, which was launched last week actually, and will hopefully make it a lot easier for farmers to measure and report food lost in a consistent way. And that information can actually give us for the first time a really clear line of sight what the key drivers of food loss on farm are from a systemic perspective and what we need to be thinking about doing differently. That being said, I think we are already aware of some issues within the food system that we could be trialing the impact of. Doing pre and post measurement is a possibility already. I don't think we should be waiting to get global data on farm loss to start making those actions. And I think a really key thing for me is we talk about the way we do business now as though it's always been that way, and it hasn't been. Our food system, the supermarket model is so new. It definitely needs to be flexible. The food system needs to be flexible to change and to examine different ways of doing business. So some very interesting research in the US around different ways of using contracts to move us from a farmers sell to retailers sell to consumers model to a more circular way of doing things. But I also think there's a huge role for our policy and our government to act in this kind of area and move to a more local model, so we can have that circular food system in a way that keeps nutrition in the human food supply chain. So using data from farms to say, okay, there was a glut, instead of wasting 17 tons of apples, let's get them to a local primary school, let's get them to where they're needed. When we have such a huge level of food and nutrition insecurity, there's no reason to be leaving food to rotten farms.
Yeah. Or at least feed it to animals. I mean, I think I just saw an article around in Japan. They've just, really absolutely nailed it with actually diverting a lot of farm waste to animal supply chains to try and be less dependent on imported feed. So absolutely, mouths first, human mouths first. But again,
yesterday I actually met with the Minister for Food Safety and the Minister for for Consumer Affairs from Japan, who were visiting, and the embassy organized the visit. And they were showing them how the food surplus was going to feed cats and dogs with pet food, and they were just really amazed by that, very excited by that. Anyway, I didn't know if you had something to add, Ben. Otherwise, we've had loads of questions come through, so thank you, everyone. Did you want to maybe add something on partnerships?
To be quite honest, we can keep it short and sweet. There's a huge amount of collaboration already occurring in this space, and a lot of it's been facilitated by RAP. But as a retailers, we're quite an incestuous bunch. I speak as closely to my colleagues at Tesco's or Sainsbury's as I do anyone internally. So there is a huge amount of conversation. This is very much a vested interest that we get this right. We share often the same suppliers, etc., etc. So we're not looking at this in silos, I will say, as a retailer perspective. Don't get me wrong, there's a huge amount more to do, but there is some fantastic collaborative work already happening. And RAP's work is an exemplar through the food waste reduction roadmap.
I would just add that is absolutely true, because we work at OLIO with most of the retailers, and you guys all talk to each other about best practice and sort of the collective journey that needs to go on to reduce food waste. It's quite impressive. One thing I just wanted to add is that I think storytelling plays such an important role, and ultimately the end consumer, which is all of us, has a very big role to play, but we like stories. So, for example, I know in the store that single bananas are very rarely chosen because people like to buy bunches of bananas. And I was thinking how you do the audits, Ben, with your suppliers. You could probably do an audit internally as to how customers shop and how that may inadvertently result in a lot of single bananas thrown away. And if that banana had a name and you could figure out what South American country it came from, it might help to sort of bring a light. Or if on the menu at Nando's it said, you might notice some of our halloumi sticks are a bit round. They're special, but this is how it happened. Customers do like to have that information. It makes them feel like they're doing their bit, even if all they're doing is listening to a story and accepting that things sometimes aren't going to be perfect. So thanks, everyone, for all of your questions. Let's go to household food waste now. Several questions around this. How is it defined, and what does a normal amount of household food waste look like? What are we expecting, and where are we expecting a household to get to?
So we currently waste about 95 kilos per household. Per person per year in household food waste. So you can do the maths. That's for the household of 4 people. That's where the £1,000 a year of money going straight in the bin comes from. And the UK target for SDG 12.3 for a 50% reduction by 2030 includes household food waste. So it's part of the commitment we've made as a country, and I think that's worth recognising. This isn't just a good idea because it'll save people money. It's actually something that we're committed to. So the maths is quite simple. 50% of that's where we want to get to. So we've done some modelling in RAP about this, and what we found is there are some areas where we really can start to make a difference. So the fruit and veg piece that I described earlier is one of the key ones, because we waste a lot of fruit and veg. What we want to do from that is learn how do we then work with the retailers to help people to buy the right size loaf of bread, because bread's another one that we waste a lot at home, etc., etc. So I think really the key is, what are the big ticket items on food waste, and how does the retail environment combined with the home environment help you to tackle that?
That is precisely a question that more than one people have asked. So Ben, following up with you, in continental Europe, for example, loose fruit and veg is very commonplace. What has been the real barrier to adoption here in the UK? Is it the weather?
For loose. So, yeah, it's a really interesting one. So, over the last 2-3 decades, as a retailer, I've been trying to get food from farm through the supply chain, through our retail operations, and into customers' home as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible, in the highest possible quality. And customers have got used to all of those factors. So our supply chains have basically adapted and have invested millions and millions of pounds over the years to ensure that we have the efficiencies through. Now what we are doing with loose, I mean, as a retailer, we've got about 500 lines that are loose currently across our estate. The reality is that any change, any small tweak, any removal of packaging has a massive knock-on effect with our supply chain and our suppliers. So you think of the whole production lines designed within millimetres to basically move said piece of packaging through supply chain. And as Waitrose, as less than 5% of the UK market, it's a difficult conversation with some of the suppliers, because they go, yeah, great, you're a really important customer of us, Waitrose, but actually we've just invested X, Y, and Z, and it's going to increase the price of that product by X amount. Are your customers willing to pay for it? Now, on occasions it's a yes, but often it's a no. So we've done loads of trials over the years. Unpacked was something I worked on from the many years ago, which basically was a concept store. The reality is customers need to come on that journey with us. What we found is if you were to have identical product at identical price point, packaged and loose, a lot of customers will still go for the packaged items for whatever reason. So it's become almost like we've provided them with this perfect product that they can't move away from. So the reality is that there's a huge amount we could do, and we are trying to do, because there's a cost benefit of removing packaging, but also we need to make sure that the customers are willing to buy into that proposition as well. And we see it on occasions, but we don't see it at the scale we need to, and I'm sure that would be the replicated across the other retailers. So as a nation in particular, we need to have a shift in the way we shop and that customer journey. We're not quite there yet, but there has to be a change.
I'm just going to ask one more question, and then we'll go to final closing thoughts. Not directly related to food waste, but often grouped into the same, basic sort of the idea of having a more sustainable retail environment and consumption patterns. Does anyone have any thoughts on the role of refill, whether that actually has any legs or can scale, how important it is? Or on, for example, deposit return schemes to help encourage recycling of aluminum and glass? What about some other big sort of potentially systematic shifts towards more sustainable consumption?
I mean, I've got some really strong views on
that.
Yeah,
great. I'd love to hear them.
We could have a whole session on it in particular. We've invested heavily in reuse and refill propositions. We've had them in for many years. The reality is that the numbers, again, going back to customers, only a small percentage of our customers actually buy into the proposition to make it viable at scale. So in isolation it can work, and we've tried we've tried dedicated areas. I've worked really closely with the likes of Carrefour in France. We've looked at loot, we've looked at reusable packaging propositions, we've looked at it all, invested millions over the years. The reality is, again, it's just the customer piece that we really need to get our head around, because we can offer a proposition, but if no one buys into it and no one shops it, it's dead in the water. And unfortunately that is the point where we've got to get to, that actually customers need to put their money where their mouth is. Because at the moment there's a small few making a lot of noise, but actually when it comes to crunch time, not everyone is shopping in the way that we need them to. And that, again, system change, cultural shift.
I think just on that, I totally hear you. It's a mega challenge, and I think it's the same with the kind of coffee cup industry and everybody, it's just a convenience thing. We're so
Yeah.
lazy as consumers. We're busy and
Yeah.
we've just had it so easy. So it's really, really difficult. But I do think there are technologies that are kind of coming through around sort of, I'm on my way home from work and I want to do my shop, but I forgot all my containers at home. Where you can almost loan and scan and then bring back when you actually are coming from home and that sort of thing. So I think there's absolutely a role for it to play. And I think we do have to try and think about what are the barriers? Why aren't more people, taking retailers up on these great options to try and help reduce food waste? And I think, I hope and I think that we'll kind of, the more we learn about why the challenge is still not overcome, we'll get there.
Yes, it's absolutely true. Every pound you spend is a vote for the kind of world that you want to live in, and it does make a difference. So just final closing thought. One, try and keep it short. I know that we're running up against time, but you can take your pick. Either one thing that really gives you hope, or a call to action for the audience, something they can do to help us all build a more sustainable food future.
Okay, I'm going to go with a call to action. I'm a hopeful kind of guy, but I think a call to action is where I'm sitting right now. We're trying to collaborate with as many influential stakeholders as we possibly can. So I could talk to you about check your bins at home, cut your own food waste, but actually let's try and change the system. So there's probably people here who work in the finance sector and the tech sector. There's probably people here who influence policy. We need to be working together on this. So we're actually in the process this year of putting together, specifically for household food waste, what's that stakeholder map look like, and what are the roles and responsibilities, and how we're going to work together to get there, not just in the UK but globally. So come talk to us.
All right, reach out to RAP.
I'll just go for my suggestion as a citizen to a fellow citizen is probably download apps like OLIO, Too Good To Go, all the kind of connecting apps that are out there, and try it out if you haven't already. It's just a little thing that you can do that can make a difference. And I think there's also just, I don't know, silly, but if you've got stuff left over, Google a random recipe, type in the ingredients. The internet is full of interesting, innovative things that you can try. And if 70% is happening on a household level, I mean, there's a lot that restaurants can do, but we just need to be a bit more creative, and we just need to be a little bit less obsessed with convenience, and we can make a really big difference.
And I love it for obvious reasons. Ben.
Look, ultimately we know what the hell we've got to do.
Yeah.
We know what we've got to do as society. It's quite obvious. We all have to hold ourselves to account for driving change, whether that be in the supply chain, as a retailer, or in our customers' homes. We have to deliver on our ambitions and just wake up and start acting, because again, we know what we've got to do. We just need to action it.
Amazing. Final thought.
I'm going to go a little contrary from you guys, I'm afraid. I'm going to go call to action, but I am going to say I feel like in general we need to meet people where they are. I heard a great statistic earlier on a different panel that in the UK we have longer working hours and 2 times the commutes that of any country in Europe. People are stressed, they're harangued, they're exhausted. We need sustainability to be accessible, and that's from a food and a food waste perspective. It needs to be accessible and affordable. So take to your innovators, to your boardrooms, write to your MPs. We need to be changing the food system to meet people where they are.
Love it. Thank you so much. I hope you guys enjoyed the panel.